lady, and then her ghost hunts and kills them. But the most interesting part of the movie is that in one of the main characters, the ghost lashes to his back, and over the course of the movie, anytime he goes to the hospital to check his weight, he weighs about 5 times his weight, and it doesn't make any sense to the doctors. And eventually, at the end of the movie, when he ends up in a psychiatric ward. We only see through the mirror that the ghost has always been lashed to his back. So I like to think about materials and forms within that way because I work with the jute bags and all these other materials which you would see. And I always think that history is somehow embedded within the forms that we find all around ourselves. But we normally don't take time to look at it because if something is old, you just think that it's something that is meant to be discarded. Um, when we think about objects like it could be a brick or a bottle of glass or anything. For me, when I started building Red Clay in Tamale, the idea was not just to think about the artist studio as a space where the artist produces paintings or sculptures or objects, but was to think about the idea of the building of the studio in itself as a work of art. So we had to make a decision. One of my mentors from Kumasi, Caricature, he has a very good friend, Ajimano Say, in Ibrahim and Kofredu, and he has a brick factory. So 2014, we had a conversation in Ibri during a residency that why not build a studio with bricks? And then to get the bricks, we had to get it from Kofreduya and then later on Winneba. So to build it, we needed probably about 500,000 to 1 million bricks to build the studio. So we had to transport all of this from Accra, from the south all the way to the north. So for me, that is very important to think about the idea that you transporting soil like terracotta from Accra all the way to the north just to be able to build this. So you can also understand why transporting trains is not a problem for me in my mind because if I can transport bricks and if you've used Accra Kumasi Tamale Road, you know how terrible the roads are. And if you go through Takwa, so if you can transport bricks as tiny as they are and transport them singularly to build like an entire institution, then why not an airplane? Why not a train? So I think about the relationship between these things in that way. Um, and of course, as we're thinking about through these materials, we're thinking about the ghost. Like labor plays a very important role because you have women, men from the community who are helping to build these institutions and to carry the trains, like the truck drivers, all these things. So there was a we have to think about the labor that comes along with when we are working with ghosts or the ghosts that are embedded within the labor forms that we work with. And I like also to think that in all of the work that we're doing, it's almost as if we're engaging in some act of restitution. But it's not just any restitution. We are restituting the idea of the common, because you're taking something that we're all familiar with, that is mundane, but something that we don't take time to reflect upon. And this time around, through art, the power of art, because art almost acts like an archaeological tool, one that allows us to be able to excavate these things, these materials in form. So we can think about it also in relation to like the historical forms, like the looting of Benin, even like the many wars that the British fought, some of which was actually for the looting of, let's say, the artifacts, particularly the Fifth Anglo-Ashanti War. And land is also very important to me. So when I started building the studio in Tamale, the basic idea was, well, I think I started with like 2 acres of land. But over time, because I realized that it was going to be a very significant space, and also it's something you're building privately, but the intent of it is public. So the idea was how to buy back land that had been sold to private individuals and then to reconstitute this public space. For instance, normally when the town and country planning people are called by the chiefs to demarcate an area, they leave spaces for schools and all kinds of other things. And later on, realize that they start cutting the land into pieces again and they sell it to individuals. And the idea was to buy back these lands. So it took about 10 years just negotiating with the neighbors and buying back these lands in order to bring them back together in order to build the studio. So I think the idea of even just buying back land again in order to be able to build public spaces is also part of the restitution that we're talking about. And we also have materials that we use in the building of these spaces, for instance, like the railway tracks, because a lot of the tracks that were built by the British from the late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of them have been scrapped by the states. So because for us as artists, when we see the railway line, we're looking at history, because you can imagine every every scar or every plant that is growing on a railway line in the bush or in the forest somewhere. all the voices and the echoes that are within these materials, and all the raw materials that have been transported upon it. They've left residues within these things. So for us, we think that they are still living things, but for some people, they are raw materials. So if the state sells the raw iron, then the villagers will come and pick up the wood and then they'll turn it into charcoal. So the idea was how to to intervene within that. Yeah. I really like. There is a text by Arundhati Roy where there's a quote where she says that the dead are living and the living are dead people pretending, and it explains a lot the world that we're living in. Sometimes we think that we are living, and then we are very much happy with the conditions around us, but the dead is even much better off than us because the dead actually, they at least they know they are dead. It starts with a sense of honesty. And so when I think about that part of a text, I'm thinking about Ni Kwate Ou, the film that he made, You Hide Me, about the looted objects in the British Museum, and also in relation to Secondly Locomotive Workshop. This is a space that was built by the British in the early 20th century for the repair of the infrastructure that was used in the extraction of raw materials in the Gold Coast. So again, how to think about the constitution of this. And of course, we also have some of the early images from the early 20th century of like the light rails that were built by the British for the extraction of the cocoa and others. So again, thinking about what these actually imply within our history, thinking about the building of the railway line itself, all the labor that went into the building of the line, the constitution of labor, where the labor came from, because in the early 20th century, a lot of the labor came from the north of Ghana, from Liberia, from Sierra Leone, or Nigeria, and all that, in order to be able to build the line in the Gold Coast. Of course, we can also think about the Golden Stool, the early 20th century, 1901, when Prempeh was taken into exile because he didn't want to give up the Golden Stool. All these things I think are very important when we're thinking about how we constitute the work that we produce. Of course, there are certain elements within my work, like boxes, like this is the shoemaker boxes which I've been collecting from the shoemakers and thinking about the question of repair, because the whole idea of the shoemaker box is to repair your sandals. But when they repair the sandal, they are not just repairing the sandals, they are repairing both the sole of the shoe and also the sole that is embedded within the shoe itself. Because elsewhere, when people have shoes that are old, they throw them away and they buy new ones. But here, sometimes we wear them until even the shoe disappears literally, because we've seen the pictures of like people's like sandals and shoes and how there are holes underneath it and all that. So I was thinking about that relationship. How do we excavate this question of care out of, for instance, a box which actually represents a very precarious group? So I like to think about it also in relation to some of these historical forms, especially like even the death and resurrection of Christ, or in relation to like Nkrumah's intervention within Ghana in like the post-independence era, and also in relation to like some of these locomotives or some of the trains and the residues that are within these forms. Um, I think one of the most interesting things that happened in our history was the Food Distribution Corporation, which was built by Nkrumah in the late 1950s after independence. And I think it's also interesting that when Nkrumah was in jail in James Ford prison, the local women, they contributed a lot of money to Nkrumah's release and also the setup of the CPP. So for me, again, the idea of the collective labor, which is embedded within the forms that we're working with, is very important for us to look at through the works that we do. So we are talking about distribution, but we can also look at the question of redistribution. So our professor in the Kumasi caricature, Seidu, he's been one of the most important artists within the history of Ghana in making this kind of ideological intervention in how artists practice, how they think about material forms and residues, things like that. And the idea was basically to think about art not just as a commodity, but as a gift. But if you're thinking about a gift can be precarious also. Yeah, so a gift is not always a good. A gift can also sometimes be bad, but a gift can also sometimes be something that starts badly but also transforms into something else. So we're looking at that also in relation to like young people, school children, and what it means within this language that we are creating. So in some of the work, I like to think about different people, different characters in history. like Newton in relation to the idea of weight and gravity, or Marx in relation to capital, or Patrice Lumumba in relation to the idea of resource and raw material. Because you have to remember that in 1961, when Lumumba was killed and cut into pieces, it was all because of the protection of the raw materials in the Congo. And Nkrumah in relation to like the Pan-Africanist movement, or Einstein in relation to the idea of relativity, time. How do we think about the world that we live in relation to the question of time itself and the history of the world? So I wanted to share just a few slides of some of the projects. Like this is Nkrumah Volini. So again, what does it mean? Artistic responsibility. So Nkrumah Volini was one of the buildings that was built by Nkrumah back in the post-independence era for storage of cocoa, share, and other things around the country, which was never realized. So, and they were built by engineers from the Eastern Bloc, from the Soviet Union, from Poland, from Yugoslavia, and they were abandoned in 1966 when Nkrumah was overthrown. So again, what does it mean for artists or practitioners within our timeline to excavate, to acquire these buildings which are being sold to be demolished, acquire them using the residue of art? Because remember, we haven't spoken about, we're talking about art in a very broad sense, because we're not talking about paintings or sculptures as art, but we're talking about the idea that sometimes an artist can produce something that is called art as a painting or sculpture, and that thing can produce another residue, and that can create an intervention. Learn from these materials in order to be able to produce. And I remember these are some of the boxes and how they look like. Eventually, when we made the work, we left the work in the factory, which was going to be torn down. And it was left there for several months. And no one, it wasn't an exhibition. It wasn't as if we asked people, we're doing it was just there. And the birds, the goats, the sheep, like all the ecosystems there, it was for them. Yeah, so they lived within it and then used it for almost a year until we took it. And I remember the first time the work was shown was actually in Ukraine, in Kiev. Before, I think there was also like in Secondia and a couple of other, but it was shown in Kiev the first time. But for me also, it's really interesting in terms of what the work does, because at the end of the day, you've used, let's say, a historical like building, and then all the residues of it, which would have been burnt or thrown away, and then we've reconstituted it into making what? A box. So it's a box, but it's also not just any box. It's a box that actually contains time in itself. Um, Ghana Airways. So I'm just skipping in between. So we also have the Ghana Airways airplanes. When Ghana Airways went bankrupt in 2000, I was a teenager, and the last planes were left. Two of them, one was cut into scraps. There were three left. One was left. One was used as a rest exhibition in a moving airplane. But it's really interesting if kids who were born after. But it's really interesting if kids who were born after 2000, like to see an object like this Ghana Airways moving on the streets. I thought it was actually quite interesting. But this is the most fascinating one. You see that there's Emirates in the background. When Ghana Airways was running, even back in the 80s, Emirates didn't exist. So it's really quite interesting that today we all have to travel through Emirates. Yeah. And it's one of the largest airlines in the world. So it's also, again, back to the question of the decay. So even when we're doing these projects, we have to parts that I want to skip. That will be the last part due to time, so that you see. So this is a very important project that I've been working on. It's the Abosso Glass Factory. So this factory was built in 1962. It was designed in Czechoslovakia and then built, fabricated in Germany, in West Germany. And then it was erected in Ghana between 1962 and 1965. In 1966, exactly on, I think, on the 5th of February, it was commissioned by Nkrumah. And exactly 19 days after Nkrumah traveled to Vietnam for peace to mediate the Vietnam War, and then he was overthrown. And this factory kept on. It ran for several decades, and it was the main factory that was used in producing all the glass bottles that we consumed in Ghana. And it was sold. So this is the original newsprint. This Atul from the FCA sent me this archive. Yeah. So and at the time it was commissioned for quite a lot of money, for like £3 million or so. But like a year and a half or 2 years ago, it was sold to a scrap company for nothing, for just nothing. So I had to contact the scrap company, negotiate with them, and then buy back a part of the factory from them. Because the idea was to see ways in which we could preserve the factory, like the factory as an archive. Because normally when you look at a building, you don't think of it as an archive. You only think of papers and documents. So, but thinking about what these bottles represented also like the molds in use in making the bottles. So we had to, and also to buy the molds, we had to take them, put them in a truck, and go and weigh it because they were selling them as raw materials. Yeah, because remember that the factory was built to process raw materials to provide jobs in the Pan-Africanist period. But of course, due to the systematic failures over the years, the buildings themselves became raw materials because they were made with a certain type of iron that if you melted on the world market, you get more money. Yeah, so I had to buy them on a raw material value, but then buying it as a raw material and then converting it into an archive. So it mostly it's only within art that it makes sense. In a regular business, it would not make sense to buy something as a raw material and then you come and say that no, it doesn't work. Uh-huh. But again, I like to think about it in relation to like mythical stories, like what is contained within the bottle in terms of a gift or a promise. When we're children, my mother had Ghana, we call drinks minerals. I don't know where we got that name from. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. And ever since we were children, we've drank our minerals. So this is me in high school with one of my colleagues. We went for an exhibition at the Alliance Française, and we're busy drinking our Coke and Sprite. And it's interesting. Like, so this is a photo of the factory, like before when it's part of it, and then also when we started the dismantling. And I also like the idea of like drawing these relations again to the idea of like history and like the idea of the decapitation and all that. It's almost as if sometimes we take joy in somehow undoing history in itself. And you have us, so like taking the fact, like using like labor again, the labor that I was talking about, lifting everything with manpower and then transporting this all the way to the north for safekeeping in terms of like into the artist studio and reconstituting. So I started making these drawings of what it would mean to rebuild it as a pavilion with the glass, because there was also a lot of glass in the factory that was not sold, more than 300,000 bottles, and we're just there. So again, how to transport 300,000 bottles from Takwa all the way to the northern region on these routes was also another question. Yeah, but we did so. But it was also a question of looking at the relationship between the glass and, for instance, corn. What does it mean in relation to like ecological questions and things like that? So this is the glass in Tamale. So you realize that now it somehow also allows us to be able to break the white cube. So it doesn't need to be in a white wall and everything. It's like it's on the ground. You can walk on it. And also time itself, because this glass was produced at a time when like all this global, what's the name? Global emissions, reduction of global emissions, it wasn't really very much then at the time. So the thickness of the bottle and everything, so you can literally walk on it. And I like the idea that so many constitutions can happen in it. Like we're planting on it, like animals can graze on it. We can also like reconstitute, make compositions on it. So this is food, this is just corn. The idea of like playing around with the forms that are within it, or even like what does it mean to harvest, to grow and harvest on top of it, or to like to reconstitute it. And these are parts of the studio, and this part of the studio is the greenhouse. So what does it mean? And this picture was just taken yesterday. So this is currently at the studio where we're packing the bottles, because we made all these, we found all these like the old boxes, the Coca-Cola, the Moscatella, the Miranda, and then we also made a lot of new ones. So we're putting all the bottles into these boxes, and then we're going to use it to build like an installation, like a pavilion. Yeah, but also looking at it again in relation to some of these historical terracotta and vessels which were used to store water in the north, like these ones. Yeah, so for me, it's really interesting. So this is the last slide. I think do they have access to the slides? Okay, so maybe as we're talking, you can be rolling those slides through, because there are some of them which are quite interesting, a lot of them to see, and then maybe we can talk about them later. So again, I wanted to end with this, because a lot of the things that we're talking about, it's not as if they are just coming from anywhere. They are things they are historical materials which we are working with. And as I said before, the gift that we are working with, sometimes the gift comes from history itself. And history, as we know, is not very kind. But sometimes when we face history, and then we take it as a raw material, we can somehow produce new forms out of it. Because red clay and all these ideas that I'm talking about, they are not just things that are in the air. They are actually things that are rooted in the histories that we've inherited, and how we can take it and further redistribute them. Yeah, so I guess we can start the conversation now. Yeah, thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. Yes. So amazing, isn't it? An artwork that encompasses everything: history, maths, engineering, technology, politics, everything. Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to have a Q&A, a conversation with Ibrahim Mahama, and the questions are going to be asked by no other person than NYU Accra Site Director Frankie Idosian.
Are we asking questions? We're just chatting. Ibrahim, welcome and thank you for such a wonderful and brilliant lecture. I think my team and I have been trying to figure out how to get into your head, and you've shown us a lot now. In 2020, when we had the first Laboni Dialogues, it was we focused on the late Kofi Ganaba. And one of the things that we were thinking about at that time was how much of an incredible artist he was, beloved by people who know music, not just in Ghana, in Nigeria, where I'm from, and everywhere, and how it seemed as if he had been forgotten. And so one of the things that we try to do with these creative conversations is to make sure that we are uplifting people while they're doing the work. And it was a great joy in December when we found out that you were named the #1 most influential artist in the world. Our Christmas started even before Christmas. And then shortly after that, the government of Ghana decided that they were going to make you an ambassador whether you liked it or not. Yeah. So we were thinking, if Ibrahim Mahama is basically an ambassador and he's Ghana to the world, it's great. But in the world of art, you have been doing a lot. With the help of Nigerians, by the way. And one of the things that was so incredible that you did was, I think you were still a student then when you were invited to the Venice Biennale. And you had this wonderful thing called Out of Bounds, which it is cocoa bag sacks that are gigantic, and you've covered all this place. What was the thinking behind taking something like this to Venice? What were they supposed to get out of these gigantic installation of jute bags?
Well, thank you. The, when I was a student at KNUST,
Shout out to KNUST.
yeah, we were heavily encouraged to experiment, to try things out, just to, because we had originally because we had inherited the old British curriculum. There were compartmentalization in terms of like painting, drawing, sculpture, experiment. So caricature and his generation, the idea was to collapse all these into one. Just an artist, if you come to school, you have an idea that you're working with. Just go ahead, collect whatever materials or paint or invent whatever you have to do in order to be able to produce your work. And as an undergrad, I did different things. Finally, when I was doing my master's, I remember collecting these jute bags because I was interested in the history of decay within these materials. And these materials, they are largely from Bangladesh and India. And when they were brought to Ghana, because when the silos, if you know cocoa processing company in Tema, it was never completed. The cocoa was meant to be stored in it. And then when they were abandoned, where Ghana was working on jute, were making jute at some point to store some of the cocoa. And then that also went away. So we started importing from India and Bangladesh. So when they bring it, the Ghana Cocoa Board is the only entity in Ghana that can buy cocoa produce from the farmers. So they when they buy the produce from the farmers, they use the bag to bag it only once. You can't use the same bag to bag cocoa more than once because of fungus infestation and all the other things. So when it's done, when the companies buy the cocoa and they take the bag to the port, they cut it and offload it into the containers. So the cocoa might go to Switzerland or France or US or where else. And the bag stays behind. And when the bag stays, there are these men in Ghana, the middlemen, they call them Zamrama. They buy these bags and they trade them. So they sell it to the women in the market, and the women in the market will buy it, and then they'll use it to bag, especially the farmers, rice, maize, on so many things. But it's most interesting when charcoal is stored in it. When charcoal goes into it, the material becomes stained, and you can no longer put any food stuff in it. And then, but then the women begin to write their names on it, because some of them, when they're traveling, they have tattoos on their body due to the historical deficiencies of like road travels. In case you died, there was a way of identification.
So it was tattoos in addition to tribal marks, or just
exactly.
tattoos?
Tattoos also. So the bag, I almost saw it as some kind of an extension of the human body. So I started doing these experiments where I would buy new bags. I would go to the market, give it to the traders. But believe me, they thought I was either crazy, I was a scammer, I was like a fraudster, or I was doing some kind of black magic or something in the beginning. Because there's a market not far from my house, Malamata Market. One of the women who sells charcoal in the market, she knows my family very well. Guy, there's something going on, I don't understand. He comes from a very well-to-do home. I don't know why he's collecting these bags, you know. But certainly, eventually I had to convince them to help me collect the materials. And I would collect them in great quantities. So the idea was to sew them together and then wrap these buildings with it. And then when I was invited by Okwi, because at the time when I was invited to Venice, I was the first Ghanaian artist living and working in Ghana that had ever been invited to Venice. And I was... yeah. And I was very young also. I was 26.
And you were a student.
I was a student. And in Venice, if you know Venice very well, you are normally either old or dead when you are invited, you know. It's like World Cup. People take it very seriously. So when I was invited, I was like, hey, I remember back then, I was talking to Robin at the time. This was 2014. And the invitation even came on Facebook because I didn't have an email anyone could reach me. And I was like, this sounds like a Nigerian scam.
Hey. But Okwi was not a scam artist, was he?
So I responded to it eventually. The invitation came, but then they said, "Oh, we want to place your work in this space." And I said, "No, I envision my work in Venice in a certain scale, you know." And they said, "Oh, but this is the space." But I had never been to Italy before. I'd never been to Venice. And I said, "Oh, can I travel and see the space, Venice, the Biennale space?" And I went and saw it. And when I was going to meet Okwi, I walked through this corridor. It was this long, endless corridor. And when we met and we spoke on our way back, we were talking about El Anachi and like Ghanaian art and like Nsuka. And on our way back, Okwi just stopped in this space and said, "I think this could be the space for you, right?" And I said, "Yes." But I said, "But how do we do it?" Because Venice, they don't fund. They don't give you money for the production. So we had to fund. But I think it was the spirit again, back to KNUSC, because we were producing everything. Because I had to produce drawings and sell the drawings, and I'll use the money to buy the jute sacks from the market. So through those same methods, I was able to raise money, and then we're able to produce this work actually single-handedly.
It's amazing. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And that, I guess, for me, it seemed like that was the beginning of you basically taking our region to the world. And I think of something else that you did called the Parliament of Ghosts, which has really been all around the world. And I just wonder, what are these ghosts that are chasing you?
Yeah, the ghosts are everything. Here we have the cabinets from the railway. And
Yes.
these are the original cabinets that were built by the British in the early 20th century. So these cabinets have been used for storing like parts of the trains, the replacements, even a lot of trains that don't exist in Ghana anymore, because during the structural adjustment program, all the old trains and locomotives were cut into pieces. So I always say that if I had one wish, I wish I was born 50 years earlier. But certainly...
What would you have done?
I wouldn't be the same person, because I wouldn't have met some of my mentors and collaborators, and every time produces something, you know. Yeah, so certainly I'm only saying that because I wish we could go back in time to save a lot of these memories. Because in Ghana, you have no idea how many buildings and how many objects have been systematically erased over, like, since even our post-independence era. Yeah. So for me, those ghosts were all embedded within this. And all these seats that you see are coming from the old trains. A lot of the trains that were cut into scraps. The seats were only saved because some people thought they could sell them to people and make money. So I would go around different places in the Western region, tracing and buying these seats back from these people. So I collected enough of the seats in order to be able to build this parliamentary form. And this was in Manchester. I was invited to do a project in Manchester. And this was just around the time of Brexit, you know? And then I was like, hey, come on, hold on, you know, because the British were like, oh yeah, we need to be left alone, immigration issues, da da da. And like, okay, let's go back 200, 300, 400 years ago, you know? So like tracing time itself. So the idea was to build a parliamentary form that would allow for convening, people to come together in order to be able to reflect upon history and all that.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Not too long ago, His Excellency the President was traveling, I believe in Zambia, and he was wearing a batakari, and some folks on social media didn't know what it was, and they said he was wearing a blouse. And it caused a bit of a kerfuffle, and you know there are now some people who are doing Batakari Wednesdays. You know, in our office, Dr. Nick is Batakari every day, which we love. But it reminded me of two things that have been in the news: Batakari and the cocoa board. And with transfers, you went to Germany and covered an old, dying shopping mall with Batakari and cocoa board sacks. How did that come about?
That we were working with. There's an old curator, Bettina, that I worked with in Germany. In
I mean, look
2000
at that.
Yeah, 17. Yeah, this it's quite. Yeah, it almost seems like yesterday.
How many people did you take to Germany? How many visas did you get?
Oh, but this one, it was just myself, my two studio assistants, that's Benjamin and Francis, and then Kwesi Ohiniaye, one of the curators and professors from the university. And then we had a lot of, there is a German guy called Raimund. When I was invited to Documenta 14, he was the architect living in Kassel who helped us to wrap the two historical buildings there. And ever since, I've been working with him in Europe. So anytime I get a proposal to do a project, we ask him to help us. So he brought a lot of these young German climbers, and they were the ones who actually helped to install the entire piece. But just that in this piece, we invited, because it was an old shopping mall, a lot of young people in Germany, you know, there's this nostalgia because now there's Amazon and all that, and some of these buildings are dying off. Of course, they have a university in Osnabrück, and they are trying to migrate the textile department into this building. And it was very difficult to get a permission. We had to go back and forth because the building, it had what the name? It has this architectural facade which was protected for quite a long time. So the city wasn't sure whether to allow us to use it, and it was going back and forth. But eventually, when the city decided that they would fund the project and do it, they had the budget for it and everything. So when we made the jute sacks, I said that okay, for the longest time, I've only been using the jute sacks for making my work. For the first time, I want to combine it with the batakari, because with the batakari, normally people just weave singular ones, and I've been collecting them for a long time, but I've never really used it.
How
in
many
the
do you
large-scale
have?
work. I think as at 10 years ago, I collected about 10,000 batakaris. Yes, I collected about 10,000 batakaris because at the time I was collecting them as I was collecting the jute sacks. But I was only interested in using the jute sacks because of the color, the sublime nature of the color. So in 2018, I was invited to do this project in Portugal, and I started going into like the textile because the town, it was in a town called Guimarães, not far from Porto, and it's a very old historical textile city, which the textile is dying off. So normally when they invite artists, they rather prefer that the artists respond to the history of textiles within the city. So that I use that exhibition as a way of reviving the textile interest in me. And then when that work was done, the subsequent work was this one. So we decided that why not we commission the weavers in the north to produce the textile by hand, because everything is produced, all the blue fabric that you see, everything was produced by hand. So everything is woven by hand, and then together with the jute sack, we draped the entire building.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of your work, I mean, all of your work is really joyous. And maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago, maybe even more, I don't remember, but there were these artists, there were a couple, Christo and Jean-Claude. And they covered New York Central Park, all 23 miles of it, with saffron cloth in the middle of winter. And it was very cold.
Yes.
And everybody who went to see it, millions of people traveled all around the world to see this exhibition. And even in the dead of winter, everybody came out smiling.
Yeah, it was called The Gates.
The Gates.
Yeah, very important work.
Fantastic. I mean, it put saffron in the lexicon for many people. And I had those same feelings of joy when my family and I went to London and saw your purple hibiscus.
Yes.
We were there when it was coming down, but it was all purple, so it felt like there was an NYU connection. And this fabulous, fantastic museum called the Barbican in London, how did this come about? Again, these are purple textiles, batakaris, covering a major cultural institution in London that looks at us as colonial children. How did this exhibition come about?
Yeah, so I was actually traveling in Bangladesh a couple of years ago, and I met a curator on the trip who was also traveling, and he said, oh, we've been thinking about you, and we want you to come to London and do this project. And I said, oh, sure. When can I come? And they said, can you come next 2 weeks? And I was supposed to go to Sharjah at the time, and then I had time afterwards. So I said, okay, fine. From Sharjah, I'll fly to London. So, and the director of the Barbican, Shanai, he's from India. And when I met him, he was talking to me about the history of the site. Because, after the Second World War, this entire area was destroyed. For some reason, the whole area was destroyed. There is a church. There's this church opposite the Barbican. That was the only building that was not touched. So they left it, and then they built the entire Barbican Center around it. And also during, I think, the period of slavery, it also used to be a place where they used to trade slaves and things like that. And also they used to trade rugs in that area. So I was thinking about all this, and I thought that, it could be actually quite interesting. I just thought of Chimamanda's purple hibiscus. And I thought, why not we commission textiles from northern Ghana out of purple. And they said, it sounds like a fantastic idea. So I made a sketch of it. And that was it. So eventually when their project was approved, I commissioned I don't know, do you have images of the stadium and the
We will
production?
look. But
Yes.
we did hear that there were many women, here they are,
Yes.
who worked
So-
on this with you.
Yeah, exactly. So we had to commission over 1,500 women and men to weave the fabric, all by hand. And then we rented the Tamale Sports Stadium, and then we used the entire stadium as a studio. So we're sewing on the stadium for, 6 months? Yeah, so every day you go to the stadium, you pay 1,000 Ghana. Yeah. It's interesting. You talk about Christo and Jean-Claude. It will take them 30-something years to do a project because someone needed to sign a document somewhere. Ghana, hello. You just go and see. You just go and see someone, and you're like, how can we help each other in order to get access to the venue? But it's quite interesting in the way that sometimes things work in our part of the world. So so these are some of the images. So we would take the strips, produce the strips, and bring the strips together in the stadium, and we'll stitch them together until we produce the entire piece. And they are very tiny like this. Yeah, so until we produce the entire thing. And for me, it was just interesting, especially when you're seeing it from a drone's perspective. Because there, it's only the birds that can see it at that. Yeah. And it's so limiting in terms of the human capacity, what we can see. So I like the idea that we could use the drone to somehow expand the view of the work. And for me, the work wasn't so much about just the covering of the Barbican, but it was about the production of the work. Because by producing this work in Tamale, it meant that we pumped so much money into the project. For instance, there's a current project I'm working on from somewhere I cannot mention.
Okay.
But it's also working with the textile fabric. And the fabrication of the work, the textile for the Batakari alone is going to cost $2 million.
Oh.
Yes. So imagine pumping $2 million into the Batakari industry just to produce textiles to cover a building. But when you're thinking about the covering of the building, it does something visually, aesthetically. You look at it and oh, wow, this is such a brutal, really interesting work, like what Christo and Jean-Claude did. But the other thing also is that it helps a long way to fuel an industry. Yes. So, but that is the thing that in art we are also very much looking at. What does it mean for the capital that comes from art in order to be able to extend this? And I think for Red Clay, that is what the idea symbolizes. That's why today I started with not the idea of the art, but the process, the logic of it. Because traditionally as a businessman, why would you spend $2 million to commission Batakari? To do
But
what
why?
Yeah, but because it's important. It's part of culture. Because you're taking something that we are familiar with that you might take for granted, and suddenly you're blowing it out of proportion. It's larger than life. So suddenly when you're looking at, because batakari is meant to be worn by the human body. No batakari weaver ever stood up and said that, oh, today I'm going to make batakari to cover a building. But the artist is the role of the artist. It's the role of the artist to be stupid. Because the artist, yeah.
Stupid or brilliant?
No, it's stupid and nonsensical. It is actually very important. Stupidity can be very important. I remember a couple of months ago, I was in South Africa in a conversation. There was a talk with William Kentridge, and he was talking a lot about that in terms of what stupidity does. Because in art, the things that sometimes we do, they are illogical. Like, why buy a train? Why? Because when you're an artist, it's already so much precarious. If you make, let's say, $100,000 from your work, already, like, you're an artist, you are struggling. Why would you spend that 100,000 to go and buy a train? The train that maybe the state, it would have been the job of the state to protect, which it hasn't been done. That's what I was talking about, the artistic responsibility. Yes. There is something that you cannot explain. Art allows us to be able to go deeper into our innermost empathy and then be able to excavate things that allows us to be able to relook at the world in different ways. And I think that's why anytime there is any government in the world where there is maybe the right wing takes over, the first thing that they go after is what? Is culture.
Culture. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they say, oh, let's defund the arts. Mm-hmm. Because when you defund the arts, you make people less sensitive. People don't ask questions anymore. Yeah, no one is going to go to a museum and see a very beautiful, thoughtful exhibition and say, oh, this was subsidized by the state and actually this had these radical ideas. No, it doesn't really work in that way. So art is important in that way, and that's why we follow it diligently.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. My textile brother. So this wax print thing is also something that you like. And for half of a yellow sun, you took those things to Hong Kong. And what is your thing with wax print? Are you collecting them too, like the Batakaris?
Yes. Okay. I mean, I collect everything. Yeah, as long as it has life and it has a soul, why not? These fabrics, I think this was during COVID period.
Yes.
And for these works, I started producing these works actually when I was doing my MFA. And at the time, I would collect the textiles from the market women. Because you know when they wrap the textile around themselves, they also store their money in it. And sometimes in the market, for instance, the women who work with the jute bags, when the jute is torn and it needs to be repaired, sometimes they tear part of their old cloth and they use it to tie up parts of it. So there is a direct relationship between the body and then the material itself. But also Yinka Shonibari, the Nigerian artist.
Yes, it's just Nigerians all over your life. Just raising you up and giving you things and all right, let's go.
You know, to be fair, my grandfather on my mother's side was from northern Nigeria.
You see now. Yes. We're giving you a passport.
I think we can all agree on many things, but Nigerian passport is not one of them.
Yes, we can agree on that. However, Yinka Shonibare did what?
So Yinka was the one who really championed the Dutch wax. And also in relation to the colonial period, how the Dutch took the wax from Indonesia and then they industrialized it during the Industrial Revolution, and then they tried to find market for it globally, which didn't work. And West Africa is where they found market for it. So also talking about what does it mean for a fabric which comes from South Asia to be produced in Europe and then sold in Africa. Also questioning the idea of the authenticity of culture, things like that. So I was already, like, in terms of like the history of the Dutch wax, I was already looking at it from that point of view. But I was just thinking about it from a very abstracted point of view. Okay. The idea of taking the fabric and then somehow cutting them into pieces and making these panels out of it. So it wasn't, at the time, anyway, when I look back to 2012 when I was producing these works, it wasn't so much about the politics of the work as compared to today, how I might think about the material. At the time, it was purely abstract.
Okay, wonderful. In 2023, we had the great honor of having the sublime Aminata Fona come to Labodi Dialogues and tell us about literature and what that does for the world. A few years ago in Paris, you had an exhibit called The Memory of Love, just named after one of her books. Also, we've just talked about Your Half of a Yellow Sun. a purple hibiscus. I'm really thrilled that you read contemporary African literature. What does that do for you? Because we are book lovers here, and we have many of those books that have inspired you on the table there.
No, certainly. For me, it's very important because when I started, I think some of the early works that I did, I was either titling them after songs. And we have our big brother Rocky Dawuni here.
Hey,
But he
Rocky!
doesn't-
Shout out to Rocky.
he
I tell you a
doesn't-
secret.
Yes.
In a month, Rocky is going to be on this stage.
Fantastic. And he didn't tell us. Yeah, so even some of the early works that I produced were also after songs, and some of like I would take maybe entire albums of people like Rocky and others, and then I would title these works after them because for me I thought that it was also very important for us to be able to connect the ideas that were embedded within our work together with other practitioners, especially writers, because if you're a songwriter and then you produce lyrics and things like that, they are very important. And of course, you know that maybe in certain courses in universities around the world, aside just studying literature as it is, they also study lyrics and that songwriters have produced over the years and all that. And for someone like Chimamanda and others, I thought that it was actually very important, both in terms of like their writing techniques, but secondly also just the content of the books themselves, in terms of Half of a Yellow Sun, Purple Hibiscus, So Long a Letter. There was also another one. There are a couple of ones. There was. There are quite a lot of them.
So Long a Letter is a good choice.
Yes,
that is an
exactly.
African classic.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I will now have to say that I'm really happy that you read African contemporary literature and our classics. Well
Yes.
done.
Thank you.
So one of the things, if I may come closer to home now, to Tamale, one of the things that I find is that you are breathing life into things that have been abandoned, you know, like Nkrumah Volini and what you're doing at Red Clay. And your institutions that you are building are so very different from how institutions are in the art world. For instance, I give the example of New York because that's where NYU is headquarters. We have many, many cultural institutions and many, many museums that are there. And they have a lot of energy into trying to bring people in who don't feel like the museum is the place for them, even when their things are there, right? It is a struggle for them to bring people in, discounted prices, all kinds of things for them to bring people in. In Tamale, you've created at least 3 institutions that are just in sync with the community, and anybody can come, and nobody pays anything to get in, and we all have this wonderful experience where we can look at artwork and still see the goats and chickens near it. So what is this, you're building institutions, but what is the driving force behind having these kinds of open spaces? Because any institution that you go to that's cultural here, 1, you have to pay, and then 2, if you're Nigerian like me, you have to pay more, and then if you're American, you have to pay 3 times more. But then when I come to Tamale, I can just walk right in and see all your things.
Yeah, we're talking.
Shout
about
out for free stuff.
Yes, exactly. We're talking about a gift. The gift is very important. And again, as I was reiterating in the beginning, a lot of the ideas that I work with, the ideas that are born out of like the residues of history. So for instance, if without history happening, without a factory decaying, without a glass factory being born, being left to decay, I wouldn't be able to acquire it in order to be able to produce the ideas that I produce or the spaces that I build. And that's what I was talking about, the question of the inherent labor. So for me, from the point of producing, I already think that it's already public. Yeah, so there are artworks that when I produce them, they are not for sale. Sometimes, for instance, when I take the old factory or something and I'm building, I'm only thinking that I'm doing it on behalf of the public. That you're like on an everyday level, you're hustling just to get by or to eat or whatever. But I always think that as an artist, the moment you go past that point where you're no longer thinking about how to feed yourself or things like that, then there are more important questions that you should ask yourself. And I remember in 2014, I sold one of my first artworks to the Saatchi Gallery in London. And I remember at the time, the money, it seemed like a lot of money at the time. It was a lot of money because I'd never seen such money in my life before. How much was it at the time? It was like 15,000 pounds or so. And it was like, hey, 15,000 pounds. So you are a student hustling, you are eating gobe and things, and like suddenly you see 15,000 pounds. So I remember I spoke to one of my professors, caricature, and I said, hey, like what, like, because before, like when you're a student, it was about, we didn't know whether this arts thing it will work. We're just working with it by faith, but we didn't think it that early, you know. So I said, oh, but what do I do with this money? And caricature said, but you've always said that you wanted to build a studio, so why not invest the money into the studio? And at the time, I wasn't sure where to build, because I grew up in Accra my whole life. I was in Accra since 1989. And Caricature said, why not build it in the north? And I said, but the north, and he said, don't worry about the place. You know, and remember when we were finishing art school, he said to us, art is like sugar. No matter where it's the ants will find it. Don't worry, you know? So, yeah, so for us, it was important. And he said, but imagine if you build this studio in the northern region. You can think, okay, of course, there are no collectors there. There are no so-called art enthusiasts or whatever there. But again, who really understands art and who does art? But imagine that by building this studio there, it's going to influence a new generation of thinkers and artists. And that alone is a gift in itself. And that is where we took it from. So the idea of like just building a studio. So I imagine when I'm making my work that I don't know. I'm an alchemist. So, for instance, when I'm buying these factories and doing these things, I really don't know sometimes what you're doing as you're producing. And that's why later I went to do the PhD. Because the idea of doing a PhD, especially when it's practice-based, is that you are learning and writing through as you're making. You don't know it. Yeah, the writing comes from the work, from within the work. So even the PhD that I wrote on, it was actually based on all these projects. The idea that we would experiment, build a studio somewhere in the north where I'm trying to learn. The kids in the community, they've never seen contemporary art before. But we are building it together. We're experimenting through it as we're going along. The kids have never seen a train before. Even like my father's generation, a lot of them, when we took the trains there, it was the first time they had ever seen trains in their lives. But if you are in Accra, even when I was growing up in Accra, my whole life, I never saw a train. The first time I saw a train was when I went to Germany for a residency.
Just leave it for
in my 20s. Yeah, because sometimes you hear the sound, but you never see the object, or you see the rail line. So for me, those things were very important. So again, how to restitute. Hey, this is the first thing.
We're about to make a small announcement when you finish.
Yes. Yeah, so for me, that was very important to think about. Yeah, how to be able to at least come to that consolidation of building a space somewhere that collectively all of us can somehow navigate through.
Thank you. I want to talk about the children and the art first, but Alfred needs to make a quick announcement.
Yes. Yeah, for the Muslims amongst us, to my left where the books are, there are chairs and tables for water, drinks, and pastries to break your fast. It's time to break fast. You finish and you come back and join us. But the conversation will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I was very... one of the sort of wonderful things about Red Clay, and really is the ability for children of all ages, students of all ages, from university, to primary, to be able to come there and dream and learn. And I wonder, when you put in this exhibit there, how did you imagine the impact you would have on all the local children coming there every day and seeing things and wanting more?
Not at all. It was just an idea.
And in Tamale, sorry,
yes,
but
not at all. It was just an idea. Yeah, but I think one of the interesting things when we started the building was that, it seemed rather strange. The idea that you were building this like big studio in this place. Because a lot of people would say to us that, but why are you building this studio in the north? Some people would tell me that when they heard I was building a studio in the north, but why are you building a studio in the north? Like, there are no collectors there. Like, the children or the people there, they've never seen art or contemporary art before, so would they appreciate the value of it? And I always told them that, I'm curious to know how we can all learn together and we can look at arts together and all that. And people would naturally come there, the children would naturally come there to play when they were going from school, because the building was being built. I'll leave it because I built everything from the beginning till now with proceeds from my work. Because Ghana, we don't have access to grants and all these other things. You're lucky if you get access to. We don't have drinking water even up to now in this space. The road barely goes there. Yesterday, one of our trains caught fire.
Yes.
And
Can we talk about that a little bit? What happened last night?
Oh, it was just an act of nature. It's we were welding. We've been repairing these trains for 2.5 years now, and then one of it was an old sleeper train which was coming from East Germany, and it was one of the last. It's the last kind that existed. I remember I bought it from a scrap dealer from the Accra train station, and it was very difficult to get access to this train. At the time, when the scrap dealer sold it to us, we couldn't get permission to take the train, because the railway at the time said that the train had been sold as scrap, and there was no evidence. It wasn't meant to be left as a piece of evidence, And then, but there were people who were living in the train. So for me, I saw it as an archive, and I think some children had even been born in the train and all that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I thought that it was actually quite interesting in terms of like as a living entity, and eventually, yeah, after so many attempts, we realized that even logistically, it was almost impossible to get the train out, because the train was parked in a place where the old railway line had been cut and then removed. So, but the interesting thing about Accra is that you have all these people who are like doing drugs in the area. Yeah. And mostly, like as an artist, I think I have high imaginations. But these people, like they really, like they are already on like cloud 9 before you even approach them. So I remember like we approached them and we said, oh, we have this train that we want to move. I said, oh, but how do we do it? So together with some of the railway workers, there were some old lines that existed in the area that were not being used. So we had to excavate all those old lines, and then we had to build a new railway line. And then we used manual labor to lift the train and put it on the line, and then we pushed it all the way to where the crane could take it. And mind you could only do this in a very short gap of time within a week, because the market women are selling every day. And it's only on Sundays within this period where they go to church. That was the only time we could go there with a crane to pick up the thing. And then we managed eventually, after like a year after it was acquired, in order to take it and bring it all the way to the north. And of course, all the other trains, we have about 21 trains. Yeah, all the other ones are there. We've used some for sculptures and others, but this was the one that decided to catch the fire. So it's not, of course, when you think about it, you think about the resources that have gone into it and everything. But for me, it's more or less about what it means. Because when I look at it, I was really hoping for it to be completed, because it was a sleeper train with 10 rooms. And we're renovating it so that when students travel to the north casually, we can offer the rooms to them for them to sleep in and all that. And the entire interior got burnt. It doesn't mean it's completely lost. I'm sure we can rework on it. Yeah, so this was literally yesterday when I was on a plane to Accra. So I only got to Accra when I saw this image from my team. But as I said, our hearts may be broken, but our spirits may not be broken. So,
no, your spirits are not broken. And what we're going to do is that we will make information available to anyone who wants it. Contact us at NYU Accra as to how you can support all that is going on in Tamale. Not just maybe the restoration of the trains, but the access to art for the children and everybody who lives there, who is really... This is such a magnificent gem. Over here at NYU Accra, our students get up there every time, at least 2 or 3 times a year. And it's very, very interesting for us that you are a Ghanaian ambassador, but you still don't have water at Red Clay. What do we need to do to get you infrastructure and a good road to Red Clay? Because the whole world knows you as the #1 artist in the world. What needs to happen?
yeah, but again, it's we have an infrastructural gap in our country. Yeah, so again, yes, I said yesterday, in the region where the studio is in, like the Nantong, within that whole area, there isn't a fire station, neither is there a police station. So even, it means that if someone comes to attack us there, the police will not be able to respond until it's over, So all the infrastructural gaps, the road barely goes there. There's no access to water within the place, and the land we could have done a borehole, but the water is salty. Yes, and then if you do the reverse osmosis, that also goes a long way to corrode the sinks and other things. So we decided to leave it. Recently, they found water in this village that is about 1 kilometer away. So the idea is to eventually invest into buying land and drilling enough boreholes so that we can be able to pump the water from there to the space. So that is what we're thinking about.
Okay. Fantastic. So if you live in Accra, you can go to hotel lobbies and see a lot of beautiful art. And you can go to a few of the galleries out there to see beautiful art. But you have inspired so many people, and there are many, many artists in this country. What does our ecosystem, what needs to happen in our ecosystem so that we don't have to go to the Kempinski to see art, and people can see art in all of our cities, not just in the fancy places in Accra or if we happen to be in Tamale?
I think it's already happening because I think there is a renaissance of that. You have in Accra, there are so many arts-led spaces. The Dot Atelier.
Dot Atelier, shout out to them.
Yes,
They're our
yeah.
partners.
Yes, certainly. We have Dot Atelier. We have Nuna with Compound House Gallery. They've done a couple of exhibitions. Together with Robin, they curated 2 shows in Tamale. Even the current exhibition that we have in Tamale with the all-female show, which is curated by Robin.
Hey, Robin. Shout out to Robin.
Yes. We also have Kwesi Botre's space, World Face, which is, what's it, the place? Obojo. Yes, I think, yes. We have the Black Star Lines Collective and the space that they have in Kumasi, but also together with all the members and all the different projects that they're doing. Tracy Thompson. I think we have one of our colleagues here, Patrick Neokanta, who's been working with Tracy and some of the artists in doing these exhibitions around. I think one of the exhibitions they did recently was at the photographer, Ghanaian photographer Niobo Dai's house at the Airport Residential.
Okay, he has a very nice house.
Yes, exactly.
With a big compound.
Yes. Yeah, so I think the idea before where artists would think that when we make a painting, we have to show the painting in a hotel lobby because someone who a guest who is visiting a hotel who has money will buy it. That's not what we are thinking about anymore. The idea is just to make art accessible to people. And sometimes we're really just interested. I think one exhibition I should mention is there was an exhibition that Robin curated in Kumasi in 2016. It was called If You Love Me. And that exhibition was very important in the sense that they wanted to use a railway, and there was an old crane that it hadn't been used in several decades. So in order to get a crane to work, because one of the Ghanaian artists, Lois Adeakwa, she was one of the winners, I think the recent Yasantua Prize, they were commissioned here to do a work in one of the abandoned trains. And they wanted to lift the train up. But how do you lift the train up if the crane is not working?
How?
Yeah, so they wrote a letter to the railway in Sekandi, the headquarters. And then at the time, the chief mechanical engineer, Kwegri, together with the director, they gave permission to remove working parts of a crane that was working in the railway in Takrade. And they brought it to Kumasi together with the workers and then rebuilt the crane to work. And then the artists did the work in it and they lifted it. It was an entire installation. And that was very inspiring. But imagine if you're doing a work in a hotel lobby, all of this will not play out. And I think that's why when I was talking in the beginning, I was talking about caricature and that influence, because that pedagogical influence was very important for our generation in order to be able to break that gap between how the artist was thinking about the way they make art, not just as a commodity, but when you're making work, you have to understand that, because sometimes people ask me that, oh, is art political? Yes, of course, art is political. The way you even make art, because we have to remember that when Martin Luther was in one of the greatest speeches that he wrote it when he was in cell in Montgomery. So it's also very important to think about the processes in which something is born or something is being made. How does it really open up its own experience? If you're looking at art in that context, certainly it's not the same way if you're looking at art which is hanging in a hotel lobby. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You've talked about the sort of academic influence, and I wonder, first of all, you're at home here at NYU, so know that NYU Accra is your home, but if you could talk about the influence that KNUST has on your work.
I think as for KNUST, I always say that their reward is in heaven. Because it was a space that really allowed me to experiment. Again, Christo and Jean-Claude would take many, many decades in order to get permission to do projects. But at KNUST, I would write letters to wrap buildings. I remember one of the first buildings I wrapped in KNUST was the KNUST Museum, which is now the Prempe, the first museum also. Was it Opokuware? Yeah, of course, I think it's Prempe or something. Yeah. So, but at the time it was very new. And I remember the head of department at the time, Castro, he wrote this letter. Yeah, because before it used to be that when you were an artist and then you were practicing, you were doing work in the faculty, there were only certain types of works that could pass. You know, I don't think 30 years ago or 40 years ago, artists like ourselves could exist. Yeah, but it had to take a generation, caricatures generation, in order to be able to change that. That they could somehow empower artists to think differently about how they could think about material forms and all that. And also they would put their own reputation on the line and write letters for their students. Oh, I want to do a project at the railway, because they would encourage us to do our own exhibitions. Some of our our colleagues were doing their exhibitions, let's say in graveyards. Some of them, I remember one of our colleagues back in 2010 when we were finishing undergrad, her whole exhibition, Hearts Will Can Come, was in a trotro, where she and her roommates, they hired a trotro, and then they drove the trotro around Kumasi for a day. And at the time, it wasn't very common to see a female trotro driver and a female mate. And that was the whole exhibition. And this was an exhibition that you can never buy. It's not a commodity. You can't buy this work. So that was where we were coming from. The idea that even when you go and like, when I buy this factory building and I'm building, you're not thinking, it's not, you can buy this factory. Where are you going to put it? But the idea that in doing it, it also somehow extends your own ambition, because the idea is somehow to stretch the limits of the capacity of your thinking, because engineers do it all the time. The state has the capacity to do it, but sometimes you ask yourself why it is not, the question of rebirth is not within our constitution, because when something is old, we think that, oh, how do we discard of it? But the question of caricature was that, of course, we come from a long line of history where maybe we've had many painters, sculptors, but we also need other artists who do other types of things, who are also using poetry, who are doing performances. So today when you go to KNUST and you look at the artists who are coming from there, they're using all kinds of materials. But 30, 40 years ago, it was not the case. So I think that's the gift. And it's not, we shouldn't take it for granted. There are not many schools in the world that still have it. Even the schools in the West, it's not many of them that still understand the significance of art. Even though in that level, even though we might be studying from Ghana and then we're looking at, let's say, minimalist pop culture, we're looking at artists from New York and other places, but even sometimes you go to America and you go to certain schools and even the curriculum, it still doesn't allow the artists to be able to think and produce the way that we produce in Ghana, like the kind of practice that I've been able to build.
So thank you for that, and thank you for saying that art is political, because I think a lot of your work really opens all of us to thinking about living and doing better and not discarding things. I read that a few years ago, though, somebody tried to commodify you and cut up some of your pieces and try to sell them, and you decided to bite back. What was that like, going to court for the destruction of your art, or attempting to sue? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I was sued for writing a cease and desist letter, and then we had to sue back, and it was back and forth, and eventually I had to travel to Los Angeles for this court thing, and this was in 2016, and so I applied for a visa. I was very lucky at the time. I got a visa very easily, and I traveled to Los Angeles, and then I went for this court thing, and eventually the case was scrapped, and then they asked him to stop. And at the time, it was actually quite interesting, because it was a time when things were beginning to pick up for my practice globally on a very serious level. And this could have almost ended everything. So
they were coming for you,
exactly,
as you were cresting the wave.
Exactly. And I knew what was at stake, and I really wanted to somehow keep the integrity of my practice together. So I just went after it, because it wasn't just about me at that point, but I also realized that whatever work I was doing at the time was going to have an effect on a whole generation of artists who were going to come after me. So I really needed to prove a point about it, and eventually we did. And whilst I was going for the court and everything, it was the same period where we were building the foundation for Red Clay. So fantastic. I try as much as possible not to be distracted by a lot of things. Even in the midst of like all the shenanigans and the difficulties, I wake up and I ask myself, what is the most important thing to do today?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very, very much. Yeah. Don't be shy. Alpha has informed me that I am keeping people from the refreshments and talking to you. So we'll take a couple of questions and then we can move on to the fun part of the program where we all break our fast and eat and continue the conversation. But thank you for being here.
Hello? Well, since I have the mic, I guess I would ask the first question. Ibrahim, I've been to Red Clay Studios, and besides seeing your work and being a big fan, as I said, at Mahama East, I have seen your journals, how detailed you are to the works that you do. Actually, your journals is enough to call yourself a writer, but then the work that you produce, I read somewhere that they say that the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your attention. So my question is, what is the quality of your life, your personal life?
Hey, hey, Alpha. Personal life.
He's asking alpha and omega questions.
You know, just so that you know, it's not a Nigerian that asked you about your personal life.
No, I think it's very important, certainly. Yeah. Look, I come from a very big family. It's a very detailed, meticulous family. Yeah. My father has many wives and many children, and I come from that background. I went to boarding school when I was 5, and already at that age, you had to learn how to live with other kids and tolerate their nerves. And yeah, for me, I think it really did something for me because you had to learn how to care even at that age. Because I remember when I was in boarding school in St. John's, already at 5, you had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and go and fetch water to come and bath before you go to class at 6 something. And sometimes when you're in Europe, you see kids going to school at 9 something. And like, hey, you people, you are going to school at 9, and yet you are inventing the iPhone. And in Ghana, you wake up at 4 o'clock. Sometimes we are driving to Kumasi, and kids are already going to school to go and draw cockroaches on the board and things like that. No, but it was interesting in that sense, you know, at that age, like how to even bathe yourself. And sometimes some of the kids were smaller, they couldn't bathe, how to help them bathe themselves and all that. So we had to, and wash your own clothes, growing up with that. And going through secondary school in Ghana and everything, you know how the system is and all that. And yeah, so for me, the idea of family has always been very important, certainly. But I think more importantly also is about how that affects the community around you. Yeah. And my father was also a very big inspiration because when my father was growing up, my father was born in Adabraka in 44. And his father was a cook back in the day. He worked on one of the British vessels. And so he used to move around a lot with this. He had this white man that he served. And in 1950, my father was sent to Tamale. And then he grew up in Tamale. Of course, he came to Accra, Takoradi, another place he was studying. He wanted to be like a builder, an engineer. So he studied architecture later at the university. So when he finished university and he was in Tamale working at the time, I think what most important was that among his family, his father had many children, but he was one of the few ones that were educated and sent to school. So when he became successful, the idea was to somehow extend everything he had become onto the larger family. So even sometimes when my father would travel and then do construction, build roads in places, he would even like adopt children from there and things like that. It was always very interesting to think about ways in which he could redistribute the wealth that he had made in his life by just being like just building and doing all these other things. Yeah, so but in my work, it was more interesting because when I met caricature at the university and then the group, the Black Star Lines Collective and all that, the idea was how to think about it beyond just the confines of the family, was to think about it in the question of the collective. Yeah, so that is where the connection comes in. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Hello. I should probably stand. Hi, good evening. Just wanted to say this conversation has been very insightful. I find your brain very interesting. Yeah, so my question is about, I personally have been thinking a lot about hauntology, and you talk a lot about hauntology and like how it you map it out for us and how you've used it to, create the exhibitions and artworks that you have. But my question is, like, particularly, why does that philosophical approach intrigue you, and why does that inspire your work?
I think, when we were growing up in Ghana, I don't know if many of you remember, the Ghana films back in the day, there was an obsession with ghosts. Unless someone didn't die in the movie, they became a ghost. And then it was a way they also portrayed the ghost, They always had this white powder on their face. So I remember when I was a child growing up, I always had nightmares when we were in boarding school, because we're always talking about ghost stories. And you remember Ghana in the 90s, there was all this like power outage. You had 3 days of light, 3 days not. So when we're boarding school, sometimes we gather around like the lights and then we talk about stories. But I don't know, as kids, we've always been told ghost stories, And I grew up with this in my head. And of course, like, I'm a big horror movie lover and all that. And on top of it, I'm also very much attracted to old things. I really like old rusted things, because I always think that when something is old, it has so much embedded within it. If I see a scar, even when I see scars on people, I'm like, oh, your scar is very beautiful. They're like, oh no, I wish I could get rid of it. But for me, the scar is part of a memory, something that tells a story and things like that. And I somehow wanted to dwell and focus on that. So I shifted it into like objects and like context. There is there are 2 projects that we did recently. One of them is an old building, which was in Jamestown. It was a building that was built out of the stones that were brought during the colonial period to build something. And then the building was going to be destroyed. So someone told me about it, and I contacted the family, and I negotiated, and I bought the building, not the land. I was not interested in the land. And we worked with guys in the community, and we dismantled the entire building. It was all stones. We dismantled it stone by stone. It took 2 months. And then we took all the stones to preserve it. Because you imagine the stones came all the way from Europe to build this back in the 1800s. The other one is a building that is currently in Tamale. It was one of the first buildings that the British built in Tamale. It was a colonial outpost, which is at the edge of the city. And a couple of months, about 6-7 months ago, they were selling the land, not really the building. But I had an interest in the building, so I bought the land in order to preserve the building. And currently, we're in conversations with the chief in order to be able to protect all the land around it, because at the time there were trees that were planted there, very special trees. And these trees, you don't really find them anymore, because those were the trees that the ecosystems of the bats, like bats would live in these big trees and all that. But today, the bats don't have anywhere to live. So even in Red Clay, within the walls of our buildings, the bats, we have over 100,000 bats that live within the walls because of the way the architecture was designed, because of the cavity in the wall. Or in Nkrumah Volini, where the building was abandoned for 50-something years and the bats used there as a refuge. So for me, all these things are important. So the question of the ghost comes and lingers in all these different things. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've made me get up from my seat for the first time to contribute to the conversations. Michelle Tete.
Fantastic
indeed,
artist, by the way.
Yeah.
Sculptor.
He was our senior when we were in undergrad. He was doing his masters at the time.
Yeah, sure. Caricature has indeed contributed to our lives. It's interesting he doesn't travel around for anyone to see him, but we are the ones doing the contribution, showing him around the world what he has done for us. My contribution is like a story. I mean, your story, an intimate one with your collection. And when the prof told me you were coming, this story was just on my mind to share it. I mean, it's a very short one. How, for the first time I saw you, I stood to come and look at who wanted to get a mask from my friend Michael Menukobia Walazi. And today I'm sitting here, you are also sitting sharing the story about your collection, very inspiring. And then I think that anytime I hear of or see any of your collections, then I remember that small mask and how valuable when put on a scale. The magnitude of your collections now and that small one that you were coming for. My friend asked me, do you want to have the mask? And I asked him, but you don't like it yourself, you don't want your mask anymore. He said, he wants it. He needs it so much, he told me. So, okay, give it. So, I mean, it's interesting to see you way back and how far you have come now. That is the story I want to share.
How far have you come, Ibrahim? From Adabraka through your dad.
I don't know. I'm still on a journey, so I guess I can't evaluate that for myself. Yeah. I guess it's something that other people have to see, or the collective have to see. But certainly, you know that there is something that you're doing, and your work has an impact. Yeah, but certainly, I'm also just interested in following it through. So for me, I'm more interested in the journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you think about where you started and where you are now, where is a place that you would like to be where you then feel like you've been able to do a lot of the things that you want? Do you want to build more institutions? Do you want to do more what you're doing with children getting educated? Do you want to continue? I'm sure you want to continue to lift Africa to the world, because everything that you do really is about us as a people.
Yeah, I guess you can almost see what I'm doing as a template, because if you apply the logic of the things that I do, you can apply it to many other things, and it suddenly begins to make sense, either in medicine or agriculture or all these other disciplines and areas. The reason why I say that is because in our regular everyday lives, things happen in our country, and sometimes you cannot explain the logic that goes into it. So for instance, my brother is a neurosurgeon. He trained in Cuba for 13 years, and he works in the Tamale Teaching Hospital up north. But sometimes there are patients that are brought to the ward to be operated on as a motorbike accident, but they need a very small tool to operate, and the tool doesn't exist. They have to wait for the tool to be sent from Accra. Or we've had an MRI scan in the hospital for 20 years. The MRI scan doesn't work. But there are over 7 million people that live in the north. Doesn't mean that an MRI scan costs maybe about $1 million. Doesn't mean that the 7 million people, their lives are not worth $1 million. So there are a lot of things that are embedded within it, you know. So if the idea, because sometimes people misunderstand me. They think that I'm interested in training more artists in the world. I think sometimes we have enough artists, and we need more people with artistic sensibilities, because if you have people working in law, in medicine, in politics, who think, because it's not, sometimes we try to be too logical of the world, but even in the irony is that in trying to be logical about the world, that's when we actually even destroy the world that we live in, you know. But the idea that we're thinking about the question of care is very important, you know. And for me, that is what I'm interested in. All the buildings that we are buying and turning them into public spaces. There are so many buildings all around our country which could have been converted into like institutions. Imagine the glass factory that we bought. It was so massive. It was like an entire town in itself. Imagine that at the time they had said that, we are going to dedicate $1 million and we are going to convert it into a cultural institution. Or we have artists. What do you do with it? No. But someone just made a decision. Let's cut it into scraps. And that decision is made on a daily basis in this country. So again, that's the problem. The thing is that until whatever we do can somehow be infectious in such a way that it influences another generation, to think differently. And I think that's why for us we focus a lot more on children in a way when we are building, or the collections that we are building. If I produce artworks and I know that these works are very important, why would I sell the work off when I know that the work can be part of a collection here? Because in 100 years, a century to come, you are creating a different economy and also a different ecosystem. And of course, children are going to grow up seeing that work and that system, and it's going to re-influence the way they think about the world. If you're going to go to a museum and the museum is made up of different buildings that have been saved because an artist who was as precarious as he is decided that, this was important for us to be able to do. Then if you find yourself in politics, why can't you do more? If you find yourself as a lawyer who is earning more money, why can't you do more? So I think it's also about what we dedicate our lives to. That I think that eventually I'm more interested in how our works can influence people on such a wider level.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Every time I listen to you, sir, it really excites me. There's lots of different things you've already talked about, so I'll try not to touch on them all over again. But I think my main curiosity is pausing from talking about the future, you're like an archaeologist. You kind of go back and then you dig up what led to where we are and how does this live. And so I think my question to you then is, when you look back at yourself when you were a kid, because that person that you are now always existed in you, what are some of the earliest memories of this burden that's always been on your shoulder, and what are the early manifestations of that part of your identity?
And have you felt it as a burden or a calling?
Yeah, sometimes you feel it as a burden because there's this burning desire in you to save, to do something that sometimes you don't really understand why, going back to the same things over and over again. When I was a child, I was just a child, honestly. When we grew up in Adabraka, my grandparents lived in an auto mechanic shop. There was no electricity in the house. It was just a shack building, like made up of roofing sheets. And of course we went to school and everything. But in the compound, they had all these cars there. And then when we came back from school, we used to play in the cars. That was our playground. And of course, when I later on went to boarding school and then was going to high school, one of the earliest memories I have was going to the art center. This was in 1997. Our school was doing an excursion, and then they asked who wanted to go to the art center. So I went with the bus. It was like from different classes. And I remember the Presbyterian boys, they were having a play at the time. It was a really beautiful play. And the song I even remember, recently I was talking to one of my colleagues, Bernard Akwe Jackson. I was singing the song. He was like, where did you hear this song from? And I said, I heard this song in 1997. I went for a play at the art center. He was like, I was there that day. He was on a grammar group. But of course, Bernard and I, there's like a 10-year gap. So then it makes sense. Because when I was young, he was already finishing secondary school. And then he was there at that time. And it made such an impact on my mind, the idea of like creativity, the play and everything. And that was one of the things that stuck with me. And I used to I was part of the drama group for a long time in school. Acting, we used to go to secondary schools, performing The Gods Are Not to Blame, and things like that. And for me, that was very important. It's the part of the burden proper came in KNUST when I started studying philosophy with caricature. And suddenly, combining that together with where you are coming from and where you are as a country, As Frankie said, sometimes when you find yourself in a place, you don't have to think about certain things. Like if you find yourself in America, or elsewhere, there are museums and institutions there. So as an artist, there are certain questions that you might not ask. But when you find yourself here and you're burdened with those voids and those gaps, then I think that as an artist, it is part of your role to respond to it. Because sometimes maybe musicians will say, we don't have concerts and music venues and all that. But why can't you can also organize your own spaces and things like that. All those things are part of the responsibilities of the craft, I strongly believe in. Yeah, so those burdens come, I believe, as your craft develops and grows. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Hello.
Hi.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. I just have a brief question. And before I go on, I just would like to bring to this conversation a brilliant essay that I read from Liz Johnson. And the title is What Next? Rethinking Investment in the Ghanaian Literary Scene. And I'm saying it's brilliant because Liz goes on to talk about a lot of things, how artists or creatives are not allowed to be artists, in the sense that as an artist or as a writer, you are writing, you are trying to also promote yourself, you are trying to be an editor, so on and so forth. And my question to you is that now that you are a renowned artist and everything, are there infrastructures in place for you to be an artist, to solely focus on art rather than focusing on the, in quotes, bureaucracies of going through your practice and everything? Do you have a team? And then also, could you speak more to how collaboration with other artists, and then not just in arts, but then in other genres that everything has helped your practice now?
Yeah, you have a team, don't you?
Yes, I do have a huge team.
All those women we saw in there. Tamale Stadium.
Because even currently at the studio, yesterday when I left alone, we had over 100 people working at the studio. Yeah, a lot of them, the women from the local community, because they've been helping us a lot with also reorganizing like the archives and the work. And even a lot of the installations that we do in the studio, mostly we work with the women in the local community. Because most of them, they mostly farm, and then when they're not farming, they're just sitting at home. So when there's any opportunity to install a work or to do something, I mostly work with them in order to be able to install all these things. And certainly, I have quite a number of studio assistants who help in different things. And I also have a studio assistant who is actually in Italy that helps me to organize like some emails and like organizing like schedules and all kinds of other things. I used to do some of these things by myself.
Hang on. Your assistant
I have
is
many
in Europe.
I have many assistants
Your
in Ghana.
assistant
No.
is in Italy.
No, I have many assistants.
Earning in euros.
No. I have
Hey,
many
Charlie.
assistants in Ghana, but I have a very specific assistant who does very specific things because when sometimes you are invited to certain projects, like the global projects, where because this assistant she's worked with many of these kinds of artists who've had that kind of practice for many years, so she knows it. Because sometimes when you have to, of course the idea is that she has to train someone from here, because for many years I was doing it by myself, or I would work with some of my colleagues like Selom and others in order Francis to do this, but she does it so effortlessly because she knows the language of it. She knows what to respond in an email, even without me seeing the email, she can respond to it. Whereas sometimes language becomes important. Because sometimes you read an email and then the way you even respond to it, you might even destroy the project to begin with. So some of those things are important. And and I also have the galleries that I work with. I have 2 galleries I work with. There is A Palazzo in Brescia in Italy, and then there is White Cube in London. Of course, they have like spaces around the world in Hong Kong, New York, London, Seoul, and I think so, yes. And they have lawyers, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes even when you're dealing with contracts and all these other things, they deal with all these things on your behalf. Of course, that's why like when you earn money, you only get 50% of the money. Sometimes after discounts, you get 40% of the money. After more discounts, you get 30% of the money. Yeah, but you can imagine that all the work that we're talking about, it's been done with those 40%, 30%. So imagine if you had more, we could do more even. Yeah. And certainly, like the idea is that we're not just interested in artists, we're interested in all kinds of practitioners, railway workers, archaeologists, filmmakers, and we've worked with all these people over the years in order to be able to produce the practice that we have. And it's not just myself, there are so many other practitioners. Alpha himself is a filmmaker, and I will tell you an interesting story. We have, hey, I shouldn't say it.
No, you can, please.
Yeah, because
his students are here. They need to hear it.
Yeah, because my first point of encounter with him was him coming to Red Clay, like one of the times, and then like he was just very excited about the things that we're doing, and he had a couple of old MacBooks computers, and he gifted all the MacBooks to us, and they were very helpful to us. It helped us a lot in teaching the kids some of the programming and other things that we're doing. Yeah, so certainly as we're building, I think he understood the work that we might be doing it from a singular, like I'm doing it from, let's say, a private point of view, but it's all about the collective. So it's not about what Ibrahim Mahama is doing, but it's about what the work is and what it means for our collective society. So certainly, I think we should give a hand for...
Yay, Alpha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Thank you. Shall we hear it one more time for Ibrahim? Unfortunately, that's all time would allow us for question and answers because we're running out of time. We're so happy that you came. We appreciate your kind presence, and thank you so much for sharing this experience with us. It's so good that we have to invite someone to thank us for coming. And shall I call on Marian Ansar Otu? She's the Assistant Director for Student Life, NYU Accra, to give us the vote of thanks.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I trust you've all had a very wonderful evening. So I'm here to perform a very simple function and just to say thank you. And we are on Garland, so we give honor to whom honor is due. And we're going to start by saying a very big thank you to His Royal Majesty Nino Te Uwu IV, the Osumanche, but he couldn't make it, so he asked his representative, the Kotobabi Manche, to be here. So, Ni, thank you so much for honoring our invitation, and kindly extend our most heartfelt gratitude to the Osumanche for asking you to come on his behalf. And to your wonderful team seated here, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you. And then would also like to say a very big thank you to our friends from the United States Embassy. They are always here supporting us. And a very big thank you to His Excellency Rolf Olson, the Chargé d'Affaires. I think he just got up, but he was seated over there. So if you see him, tell him that we are extending our most heartfelt gratitude to him as well. And then to all our friends from the diplomatic community, thank you for always honoring our invitation. Thank you for being a part of our community dialogues. We are very grateful. We do have a couple of partners that would like to extend our thanks to. And so to the Writers Project of Ghana, they are always here. If you turn to my left, that'll be your right. We have the Writers Project over there. They always come and support us with our Laboni dialogues. And I just realized that Ibrahim loves to read a lot. He talked about hibiscus, purple hibiscus, and so many other things. And some of the books that have inspired him are being sold over there. So maybe you want to grab one for yourself so that you can also be motivated and inspired. And then we have Best Assurance. I'm sure you might have seen some tissue boxes around. When you're going, you should take one. Unfortunately, I have a cold right now, so it's been very useful. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you, Best Assurance. We have these young people on our right. They are called Academy 11, and they always come and support us. And we just want to say thank you to the Academy 11 people. Thank you for inspiring these young people, helping them to dream. And I'm sure that once you've been here, I'm sure you heard Ibrahim talk about the fact that when he was young, there were so many things that he was doing, and now you see where he is. So keep dreaming big and you will get there too. And of course, I guess special guest today, Ibrahim. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I believe everybody here has been inspired today. It's amazing the wonderful things that you're doing. And because of you, I think now when we step out there, we'll feel more proud as Ghanaians because at least we have you. And we're very happy to see our big brother, Rocky Dawuni, here as well. So yes, we are very excited. Thank you so much. And thank you to your team. I know they are not here. Salom and everyone else. For us, every semester we go up north, we go to Red Clay, we see his beautiful work, and every time we go, there's a different exhibition, and we'll be going in April. So we are always looking forward to going to Red Clay, and we're really excited for the wonderful things that you're doing, encouraging everybody. Thank you so much. It's amazing. We have all other people who help us. We have the guy who did the decoration for us. I don't think he's here, but he always does it for us at a very discounted price. So Gifty, please let Mr. Frimpong know that we really appreciate him. And then the Legon Palm Wine Band, thank you so much. Dr. Sinu and your group, can we get a beat? Yeah, thank you very much. Every time we invite them, they come, they honor us. They charge very high prices, but they always give it to us at a discounted price. So thank you. We really love what you do for us. And then you are amazing guests. If we invited Ibrahim and nobody showed up, there'll be no event today. So all of you give yourself a big round of applause. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation, and thank you for coming. And then last but not the least, the entire NYU Accra team for putting this together, starting with our director, Professor Frankie Edozien. This is his baby. Laboni Dialogues is his baby. Every couple of months, he is pregnant with something, and then he delivers. So very soon, he'll be pregnant with something, and he's just going to deliver it. So just look out for it, and it's going to be another amazing experience. So for the rest of the team, there's a core team that I call the Laboni Dialogues team. Gifty, George, Chris, they make it happen all the time. And then all the other staff members, everybody contributes. The finance staff, they're always in the back. They are the movers and the shakers. They make things happen, so each and every one of you. And then our supporting staff, the IT support staff, Sparkling, G Forest, each and every one of you, we really do appreciate all that you do. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marian. In the beginning, I said Laboni Dialogues is a platform for creative conversations and networking. So the creative conversation is over, but the networking begins. I was also reminded that I was unfair to only talk about the Muslims and their breaking of fast because some Christians are in Lent. For that reason, on that table to my left, we do have some drinks, water, and snacks, and pastries. So please, if you need, you can grab one from the table. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. The most exciting part of all. There is a stand here for all that goodies. I'm sure I've been looking at it since I came, but this is the only time that you can have access to them. So please walk straight there and get yourself. It's all halal, no alcohol, nice mocktails. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you for coming.